Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet NRL Grand Final for 2025 betting preview. We have the Melbourne Storm against the Brisbane Broncos. The Storm opened up $1.68, they're out to $1.74. The line is -2.5 for the Melbourne Storm, and the total has moved up from 40.5 early in the week now to 41.5. In this video, I'm going to go through an in-depth, everything you need to possibly know to successfully bet and profit on this game. We're going to cover all the stats, all the history, lots of different trends, and we're going to really dive deep. We'll go through the referee numbers, the history between these two sides, how they performed, where the edge is for both sides, so you can make the most informed as possible betting decision on this game. Because with the grand final, a lot of people just approach it which team would I rather see win this game, and oftentimes just end up backing them. But you can also, if you're not a fan of either team, approach this from a perspective where you go through and analyze each team's performances and then make a decision based off of that. And that's what I'm going to share with you throughout this video. I'll bring up the stats and let's get into it. So this matchup, the Storm have a really good record against Brisbane. That's really well documented. They have, as it stands right now, won 17 of the past 19 against the Broncos, dating back a long time. The Broncos have improved that slightly over the last few years, winning 2 of the past 5. Most recently in round 27, the final game of the year, where they won 30-14 as $2.62 outsiders. And then back in the finals in 2023, they beat the Storm 26-0 as $1.63 favorites. That was the year the Broncos last made it through to the grand final, where the Panthers came back to beat them. So for these two teams, Broncos last won a grand final in 2006, which coincidentally was against the Melbourne Storm. They won that game 15-8. That was the only time these sides have met in the grand final. And since then, the Broncos have been in 2 losing grand finals. They lost to the Cowboys in 2015. That was a game where I had the Broncos in a future to win the premiership, combined with Hawthorn in the AFL as well. And the Broncos had that game won. Carl Felt scores in the corner. Jonathan Thurston has the conversion to win the premiership from the sideline. It hits the upright, goes into extra time and a golden point, and Ben Hunt dropped the kickoff for the Broncos. Thurston knocks through the field goal, and the Cowboys win the premiership. Ben Hunt, now back with the Brisbane Broncos, gets his chance for redemption. It was kind of the whole talk for the final couple of years whilst he was at the Dragons to get back to the Broncos and win a premiership. This is the opportunity. The other grand final Brisbane have been in since they last won one was obviously in 2023 against the Panthers. That was another grand final that they had all but one, but in that final 20 minutes, the Panthers came back to beat them 26-24. The Melbourne Storm, they last won the grand final in 2020. That was the first of the 5 consecutive grand finals the Panthers made. Melbourne won that one 26-20. Then Penrith went on and won the last 4 consecutive grand finals. And Brisbane ended that streak with their win over the Panthers last week, coming back to beat them. And the year that the Storm last won the grand final, 2020, the Broncos actually got the wooden spoon that year. Melbourne, they were in the grand final last year and lost to the Panthers 14-6. Now, overall, just every grand final in general, the last 8 grand finals, the favorite has won 5 of them, the underdog has won 3 of them. Last year's grand final, the Panthers were actually the underdog against the Melbourne Storm. And from a totals betting perspective, 4 of the last 8 have gone over and 4 of the last 8 have gone under the total. So it's been an even split both ways. Now, coming into this matchup, the Melbourne Storm, because they played against the Sharks on the Friday night, they come into it on 9 days rest. The Broncos, they played on the Sunday afternoon on 7 days rest. These are the 2 teams that finished in the top 4, won their qualifying finals, and went straight through to a prelim final. We weren't able to get a really good guide on either of their performances because both the Raiders, who the Broncos beat, were awful against the Sharks the following week, lost by 20 points. And then the Panthers comfortably disposed of the Bulldogs in the semi-final, who the Storm beat in their qualifying final. But both teams We've only played the 2 games through the finals so far. Storm with that little bit of extra rest, and also the Storm haven't had to travel during this final series, but they were up in Brisbane in the final round of the year. The weather for Sunday evening is expected to be 29 degrees in Sydney on Sunday. That definitely favours the Broncos compared to the Melbourne Storm, that's for sure. And that temperature is expected to hold up late into the afternoon and up until around kickoff time, where then it'll drop off. The game kicks off at 6:30. The other thing for this game, lineups, when we bring those up, there's only the one change for either side. So Storm have no changes. Jahrome Hughes got through his return game last week against the Sharks, and for the Broncos, Pat Carrigan returns from the suspension he got against the Raiders. That means Ben Tolti is out of the team. So overall form for these two teams coming into this. The Broncos, they've won 6 straight games, including a win over the Storm in round 27. They've been the kings of the comeback bar in the finals. And if they are to put themselves in that spot again, it's going to be really tough. The Broncos also haven't beaten the Melbourne Storm twice in the same season since 2003. This will be the 3rd meeting between the sides this season. It currently sits at 1 each. We're going to do a deep review into the previous 2 games that they've played so far. Broncos are the underdogs currently for this game, and expect it stays that way, barring any major lineup changes for the Storm. And as an underdog this year, Brisbane have won 5 of their 6 games, and the only loss was down in Melbourne against the Storm in round 23. The Storm's form leading in, they've won 13 of their past 16 games. They lost their final 2 games of the regular season, obviously with having little motivation in the final game, and then they rested players in the game against the Roosters where they conceded the 40 points. This year, with that spine intact, Papenhuyzen, Munster, Hughes and Grant, the Storm are 8-1 on the season. They've only lost the 1 game. Also, Melbourne have won 7 of their last 9 games against fellow top 8 sides. They've won the last 4 of those by a 1-12 margin. So far in the finals, the Storm have won both games by exactly 8 points, both of them at home against the Bulldogs firstly, and then the Sharks. In the Storm's game against the Bulldogs, Canterbury missed a combined 77 tackles. That's missed and ineffective. That Bulldogs aren't really a side that's big on missing tackles. Sharks weren't too bad last week, but that's a slight area of concern there for the Broncos, particularly being the weaker defensive side of the 2. Broncos have won both finals by 1 and 2 points. They beat the Raiders by 1 in extra time, and then they beat the Panthers by 2 points after trailing by over 14 points in both games. The game that Brisbane had against Canberra, the Raiders missed and had combined ineffective tackles of 90. So huge numbers defensively. Canberra were really poor in that game, which is coincided with Brisbane making the comeback. Storm have led at halftime in both their finals so far. They led 14-12 against the Bulldogs and 16-8 against the Sharks. The Broncos have been down at halftime in both. They were down 18-12 against the Raiders and 14-0 against the Panthers. Both games, as I said, they've trailed by at least 14 points and come back to win. For the Melbourne Storm, if they're able to generate a 14 or more point lead, but just call it 14, then I think it's going to be really tough for the Broncos to come back from that in this game. Broncos can't afford to get away to a slow start. Yes, they came back against Canberra. Yes, they came back against Penrith, but they also had 50,000 fans at Suncorp behind them, and just the momentum they were able to get off of that. I think if that game was in Sydney against the Panthers, that wouldn't have happened. But the Melbourne Storm, they've won 84 of their last 87 games when leading by at least 14 points. Interestingly, they've lost 3 of those 87, obviously. 2 of those have come this season against the Dolphins and against the Raiders. So it's not impossible, and it has kind of been the year of the comeback teams playing one half well and the other half poorly. And that's allowing these comeback wins. It hasn't really been the year of the team that leads at halftime goes on and win, that's for sure. This final series, Melbourne have got to play both their finals at night on the Friday nights. And then the Broncos have played both their finals during the day. I think both these teams, based on their stats this year, would prefer a daytime grand final, but we get a night game. Storm have that little bit of an edge there. Storm haven't played a day game for quite some time now. Broncos obviously have tons of night games throughout the season. but their style somewhat suits day games a little bit better. I think the thing though for this game is where it evens up is with the conditions expected. It is more like Brisbane weather, barring like any humidity on Sunday for Sydney. So I think from that perspective, it helps Brisbane's gameplay a little bit more. As I said, long term, Storm have a great record against Brisbane. It's evened up a little bit of late. Melbourne, though, have covered the line, the handicap, in 14 of the last 16 meetings against the Broncos. Also, if you just look at the coaches, Craig Bellamy has won 14 of 16 games where Michael Maguire has coached the opposition side. So there's a few edges there historically. The Melbourne Storm. Now, looking at the two games that they played this season, firstly in round 23, and it's good that they're both recent games as well. We're not dealing with a round 2 or 4 game and then round 17. We've got round 23 and round 27. Also, both of these games have been refereed by Grant Atkins, who's going to be the referee for this game as well, which has been the controversial talking point of the week. Regardless, this matchup, Storm on 22-2. At home, they didn't have Jahrome Hughes for this game, but it was also the game where Adam Reynolds and Ezra Mam were both injured after about 20 minutes. All 4 of the Storm tries, which you can see on the screen there, came following the injuries to Reynolds and Mam. At that point where they went off, it was 2-0 to the Broncos. Melbourne led 12-2 at halftime, and then also on the second half, 10 points to 0. Through the timeline for this game, the Storm scored 3 of their 4 tries directly following a penalty or set restart. Broncos only completed at 82% as well, which that was a season low for them in this game. They made 16 errors. Their average completion rate is 77, so they were well below that. Melbourne had 5 line breaks. Brisbane didn't have any. It was the only game this season the Broncos have been kept to 0 line breaks, and they're actually averaging 6.1 and ranked first in the competition in that category. And it was also the only game this year where the Storm didn't concede any line breaks either. Brisbane missed 43 tackles. That was 1 below their season high, and they also had 21 ineffective tackles in this game as well. Those numbers definitely concern me, considering what the Storm were able to do to the Bulldogs a few weeks ago. Melbourne also won the penalty count 6-4 and the set restarts 3-2 in this game. This is like an interesting matchup. Like, obviously the home teams won both games between the two sides this season, but it was a pretty dominant win overall, and this game definitely meant more to both teams than the round 27 clash. The couple of things that concern me off of this is Brisbane's completion rate being so low, their post-contact meters being low, limited line breaks, limited tackle breaks. This is what they've really relied on in the recent games against Canberra and the Panthers during the final series as well, breaking lots of tackles, making lots of offloads that have been really effective in scoring. They only made the 9 offloads in this game, and also they lost the meters battle. They were down in runs of the two sides, but were comprehensively beaten in the run and post-contact meters. The round 27 meeting, Brisbane won this game 30-14. This was a game the Broncos needed to win to be able to secure a top 4 finish and get the double chance. That got them the qualifying final against the Raiders, which got them through to a home prelim. If they had have lost this game here to the Melbourne Storm, they would have been playing an elimination final as Cronulla went on and beat the Bulldogs later in round 27. This game didn't really matter for the Melbourne Storm. It wasn't going to make a difference to where they finished on the ladder. So definitely keep that in mind, and definitely don't view it as the Broncos won this by 16 points. They were a 16-point better team on the night, for example. For this game, Hunt and Walters were the halves combination for Brisbane. Obviously, that's different this time around. No Walters in the side, and Mam and Reynolds back into the team. But there was also no Harry Grant for Melbourne at all, and Jahrome Hughes went off injured with that wrist injury after 25 minutes. Broncos, they scored 2 of their 4 tries, whilst Nelson Sofa-Solomona was sin-bin. You can see at the 36th minute mark. They scored in the 38th and 41st minute of that game. Storm weren't able to score whilst Dean Mariner was sin-bin, and those kind of times overlapped. But you can see Brisbane were able to capitalise when Storm were down a player. The Broncos scored 4 tries in this game, and 3 of those 4 tries were directly following a penalty or set restart. The last try to Josiah Karapani in the final minute or last play of the game was the only exception. Storm only scored 1 of their 3 tries following a penalty or set restart. Broncos, they led this game 12-4 at half-time, and then won the second half as well, 18 points to 10. Now, compared to the first time these sides met, where the Broncos only completed at 62%, they had 40 sets, completed 36, 90% completion rate. The first time they played the Storm in Melbourne, they had their worst completion rate of the season, and then when they played them at home, where they needed the win, and the Storm, it didn't matter, they had their best completion rate. Now, the thing that's two things stand out to me based off of that is, firstly, Brisbane are able to do it when they need to. Like, when the pressure's on and they need to get the result, they're able to make it happen, which is something you really need in order to win, like, the grand final or just in general big games like this. But it also concerns me that there was potentially not as much pressure or aggression by the Storm in defense to be able to force those mistakes. So that's a little bit concerning. The Broncos, they only made 4 total errors. There was only one other game this season where they made less than 8 errors in the game, and that was against the Sharks. I think that was round 17 against Cronulla, where they came back to beat the Sharks after being down at halftime. The Storm this time around, they made 14 errors. If we scroll down there and have a look, that was their third most in the game this year, and also almost 3 above their regular average. Storm won the penalty count 11-10. Broncos won the set restarts 7-4. There was a combined 21 penalties and 11 set restarts in this game. Now, off what we saw in the prelim finals, where Ashley Klein effectively lost refereeing the grand final due to all the penalties in the Melbourne game, it's very unlikely we're going to see 32 combined penalties and set restarts like we saw in this matchup. I think to some degree the whistle will go away and there'll be minimal penalties, minimal set restarts. That is definitely going to favour the Melbourne Storm, which I'll get to later in this video and explain why I believe that is the case. But it was certainly a game that was filled with penalties and that kind of thing, hence why so many of the tries and stuff were on the back of them. But both these matchups where both these sides were playing with different personnel, particularly in key positions, that we're not going to see this time around. And obviously also Melbourne didn't have their spine intact for either game against the Broncos this season, and Broncos, they were without Reynolds and Mam for the most part of both games. You don't want to put too much into that, but I think Brisbane's completion rate is going to be crucial, especially as we've seen a major disparity between the two performances that they've had previously against Melbourne. Now, the list for this game, the Grant Atkins, as I mentioned, is refereeing. Now, all time, the Storm have a 32-17 record with Grant Atkins refereeing. The Broncos have a 21-24 record with Atkins refereeing. Both teams have a lower win percentage than their regular win percentage if you just look across all their games. This obviously isn't factoring in the level of opponent or quality of opponent that they've faced in these games. This year, Atkins has refereed 6 Melbourne Storm games, 2 of those being against Brisbane. The other 4 are against non-top 8 teams. Melbourne have a 5-1 record with him in charge, and they also won or tied the penalty count in all 6 games that they played with Atkins refereeing. Broncos have a 1-1 record. He has only refereed the 2 games that they played against the Melbourne Storm. The situational records for this game, firstly, it's at night. Melbourne are 12-6 at night this season, but they're only 5-13 against the spread. So they've only covered 5 of 18 games, depending on what the handicap is. Broncos are 12-7 in night games this year and 10-9 against the spread. As a favourite, the Storm are 18-7 this season, but they're only 4-4 when they've been favoured by 6 points or less. Broncos are 5-1 outright and against the spread when they're an underdog this year. From a statistical perspective this season, we've got 2 sides in the top 3 in points per game. Broncos slightly above the Melbourne Storm overall. And from a defensive perspective, the Storm are a top 2 defense. They're also the best first half defense. The Broncos, they rank 7th in points conceded overall and 5th in the first half defense. So the edge overall based on attack and defense numbers goes with the Storm, as they're basically even in attack numbers but clearly the better defensive side. And defense is ultimately what wins you the premiership. Spoken about this previously in other videos, how important defense is in these games. This list right here is the last 23 premiership winners going back to 2002. Now, when you look at these teams, you can see all the way back to 2009, which was the Storm. A team that's finished top 3 on the ladder has gone on to win the premiership. The Storm fit that category, Broncos don't. Attack-wise, hasn't mattered too much. Generally, any team in the top 4 for the most part, going back over the past 14 years or so. Penrith last year being the only exception, but they were clearly the best defense. Now, Penrith have won the last 4 premierships as being the number 1 defensive side, but over the past 19 seasons, going all the way back to when the Broncos won in 2006, either a top 1 or top 2 defensive side in points conceded has gone on to win the premiership 17 of those 19 seasons. The Cowboys and the Sharks were the only 2 exceptions, but you'll notice they're both conceding under 19 points per game in those years. That means that going into this game, the Storm are the second best defensive side, but the Broncos out there in 7th is the concern, because history tells us that the Storm should have a significant edge in this game based off of history. What I want to do is just not only look at their overall stats, I want to break this down into some more specific categories for you guys and just show you where the edges are for both of these sides. Firstly, for the Broncos, when we look at their overall season and last 4 games, it's held up fairly consistent from an attacking perspective and also defensive perspective. So they're on par with their overall season performance right now. I also like that their attacking numbers don't drop off too much against top 8 sides compared to bottom 9 teams. This shows us that they haven't just been running up 40, 50 points against the bottom sides and then barely scraping by against the top teams. Those numbers are good, and also their defensive numbers are better against the top sides, so they aim up defensively. Slight concern that their away numbers drop off in attack and also drop off in defense. This is generally what we expect to see, and it's not too far from that, but they are averaging over 30 points at home this season. The difference, however, in this situation is not a typical away game. Yes, they're traveling, but it's a neutral venue for both sides. Night games, they're averaging slightly more, but overall, their numbers in day games are better. They're just managing a little bit more points, particularly in the first half. They jump from 10.9 to 14.1. Defensively, they're better in night games as well. We'll get fine conditions, and that doesn't really matter too much in this game. They're very good on 7 days rest, averaging just under 30 points a game. The numbers off a win are just not quite as good as they are off a loss. But on 7 days rest, their attack is great. The concern I have for the Broncos is their performance as an away underdog. If you drop down here, when they are a home underdog, they're only conceding 15, but as an away underdog, it pushes right out to 22.7. And there's another stat I want to share with you as well. When we look at top 8 teams, and this is a really important metric that you want to use, is opponent meters per point. And here we're just looking at against the top 8 sides. You can see the Broncos rank 11th at 85.5 compared to the Storm at 201.2. Then also when we look at it from an attacking perspective, the Storm number 2, 70.7. The Broncos right down here at 118.5. These numbers here tell you that Brisbane are going to have to really make use of every possible chance that they get. They're firstly going to have to defend their goal line very well, as 70.7 against top 8. Those are elite numbers the Storm put up this season, and Broncos all the way down at 119. It's also going to mean that for them to generate more opportunities, they're going to have to win the battle in the middle, which we'll get to at the end of this video when we go through some of the key factors, but that's going to be really tough based off what we've seen so far. Scroll down and let's look at the Melbourne Storm and their record in different situations this season. So their numbers are in the last 4 games and poor from an attack and defense performance compared to Brisbane's, where they held up. That's obviously due to the Storm losing their final 2 games of the year, and particularly that 40-10 result against the Roosters are significantly impacting those numbers. Storm perform better against top 8 teams than they do against bottom 9 teams, both in attack and defense. Home numbers, very similar to what we saw at Brisbane, where it drops off in away games. Night games, 22.8. Storm haven't found points in night games to the level that they've been able to in day matches this season. And with this game being at night, that's going to be the test for them. Can they find enough points to beat a Broncos side that will be full of confidence? 7 days rest definitely helps them. And here, 7 days rest, their defensive number drops all the way down to 16.2. This is like basically best in the league, points conceded when they've had at least a 7 days rest, and they get 9 days coming into this. If Brisbane are struggling to score points and they're only scoring 10, 14 points, 18 points at best, this right here is your exact reason why. When the Storm are rested and they have time to prepare for their opponent, which is exactly what they have in this situation, they're able to shut them down. These numbers are all very good. The meters conceded per point increases all the way from 65.7 to 191.1. That's critical for this game, particularly when the Broncos haven't been running in like points quickly against top 8 sides for the most part of the season. The missed tackles drop down. They're able to limit offloads slightly more. They also give away slightly less penalties and set restarts as well. This right here is the key for the Storm, and also why I think they're going to be very hard to beat in this game. Their numbers off a loss are obviously very good. We've spoken about that previously, but their defense stacks up in either situation. So the numbers aren't inflated by defending really well off a loss, whereas their attack numbers are inflated when they're off a loss. They are technically an away favourite in this game, but also Melbourne on a Sunday. Now, these games have been played during the day. You don't want to put too much into this, but they've found points easily on Sundays, and also that's their best defensive day as well. Overall, what these numbers tell us is that the Storm should be able to limit the Broncos' attack, and a little bit better than the Panthers and also the Raiders have done in recent weeks. Not that the Panthers, like, they only let in those points late, but also Brisbane shouldn't be able to get away to a good start. Storm have been one of the best first half sides. Also, if you go back in history, under Craig Bellamy, the Storm, when leading at halftime in a final, have gone on to win on all 29 occasions. That also adds extra merit to the fact that the Broncos may not be able to make that comeback. They're going to have to do better work early on in order to be able to win this game. In finals, Brisbane have lost 10 of their last 11 finals away from Song. That doesn't look great. The Storm, though, they've also lost their last 4 finals away from home. They've also struggled to score in away finals, only managing a try or less in those last 4 games that they've lost. Storm, with where they finish on the ladder, generally end up with a lot of home finals till it gets to the grand final, or they have to travel up to Sydney for a prelim, or to Brisbane or something like that in previous years. That's definitely a bit of a concern there for both sides. And Broncos, of those last 11 finals, only winning one of them, it was the game against the Raiders, where it took them all the way till the final few minutes to tie it up and then win it in extra time. This game will be played at Accor Stadium, and the Storm, they've won 7 of the last 10 at Accor Stadium. 2 of those 3 losses were against the Panthers in finals. They've only played there once this season, which was against the Rabbitohs, and they won that game 25-24. Broncos have lost 8 of their last 11 matches at Accor Stadium. They're 1-1 there this season. They lost to the Rabbitohs 22-14, and they came back to beat the Bulldogs after being down 18-0 and won the game 22-18. So that's the history at the venue. They're all the main stats. Ultimately, what's it going to come down to win this game and for them to get over the line? So, first thing, conditions being 29 degrees, being warm, it's going to suit Brisbane a lot more, but it'll also create a little bit more daylight conditions for the Storm to play their attack. And as we saw, the Storm attacking numbers in day games are astronomical, the numbers they've put up this season. I don't think it's a huge advantage to the Broncos as it potentially could be had they been playing another side that is a bit more defensive orientated, struggle to score points. Like, for example, if this game was Bulldogs versus Broncos, then it'd be a huge edge for the Broncos. But against Melbourne, I don't think is as much of a case. Storm also have the extra 2 days recovery to offset that as well. And the next thing is Brisbane and their start to the game. Like, both these sides are good first half teams. When we look at their season rankings, the first half margin, Storm are number 1, Broncos are number 3. That's great and should set Brisbane up well to make this game competitive, particularly early on. But they can't afford to be chasing the 14, 16 plus points against Melbourne, especially when they're not at home. Now, the key to how this game is going to be won by these sides, and like when we look at how they played last week, Storm definitely played one of their best games of the season, particularly in that first half against Cronulla. They were like basically perfect for the majority of those 40 minutes. And there's obviously the chance they start like that again. Particularly last week was the first game back with that spine playing back together. This will be the following game from that with time to prepare. I think Storm are going to start well. But also the Broncos, my only concern with the Broncos, like if they can play like they played in the final 20 minutes against Penrith and the final 15 minutes against the Raiders, they're a huge chance of winning this game. If they can play for that for at least 60 minutes, they're not going to be able to get away with a 15-minute block like that against the Melbourne Storm, in my opinion. Now, whether last week's win helps Brisbane or hinders them, because as much as there was a lot of emotion to that win, like coming back, winning a prelim final at home in that situation, but there was also the factor of beating the Panthers, who somewhat embarrassed them in the 2023 Grand Final, where Brisbane all but had it won, similar to what the Raiders had, what the Panthers had against them. They switched it around this time around. I can't see that happening for the Broncos this time around, and they're going to need to play more than a good 15-20 minute patch in order to get this done. And the key factors that it's going to come down to, and you remember I mentioned earlier that last time Atkins refereed these two sides, there were 32 penalties and set restarts combined. That's not going to be the case in this game. And in the Storm Sharks game, you would have seen in the first few minutes Ash Klein giving the warning to the Storm about slowing down the ruck, slowing down the play the balls of the opposition. Now, this is the reason Storm have been as dominant as they have been for so many years, and also they always put up good defensive numbers, is their ability to slow down the play the ball and do it on a consistent basis without getting too heavily penalized, because ultimately they could be penalized a lot more. And even the game last week against the Sharks, in that second half where the Storm they're actually trying to hang on a little bit. They weren't trying to win that game, they were just trying to save it. The amount of slow play the balls they were forcing against the Sharks was what got them over the line. And then after so many penalties in the first half, the referee put the whistle away for the final part of the game, which is what you generally see them do in big games across all sports. Once it gets down to crunch time, the referee, for the most part, tries to stay out of it. But that's where also these tactics of slowing down the play the ball, because at the end of the day, the more you can slow down the play the ball and create more time between when that player gets tackled compared to when they actually play it, the more time your defensive line gets to get set and then be coming forward, as opposed to still having players retreating because they got to quick play the ball. It's like fundamental for gaining meters through the middle. And Brisbane, both games this season, have been below average in their play the ball speed and also in their post-contact meters. That's the concern. If the Storm are able to once again limit the post-contact meters, which generally post-contact meters allow you to either one, get a quicker play the ball, or two, it allows you to generate an offload potentially in other situations, because that's what then can create the additional play meters and dummy half runs and that kind of thing. Now, Brisbane, they haven't been able to do that in either game against the Storm this season, and I'm just a little bit concerned if they're going to be able to do that again, particularly with the fact that there's going to be fewer penalties, fewer set restarts in this game, more than likely. That's what I'd be assuming based on what we've heard so far. Like after last week, I just really can't see Atkins blowing 20 penalties in this game. It's not going to happen. Or if it did, then here we go. But that's the key. Like, Brisbane's forwards are going to need to go forward. Carrigan comes back into the side. That helps them from a defensive perspective, but they need to win the meters battle in the middle. And just not super sure they can do that. Storm are going to slow down the rock. They're going to limit the post-contact meters. And just feel like that Brisbane, the 3 tries they scored last week against the Panthers, somewhat fluky tries to a degree. You had the ones off the kicks, the lob over the top, the bounce to Mariner. Those plays are like 50-50 whether they come off. and has that luck run out. Also with the Broncos, the other way I think the Storm will probably be able to win this game is limiting their offloads. In the first half against Brisbane, Penrith did a very good job at limiting the offloads. They kept the Broncos to just one offload in the first half, kept Brisbane scoreless in the first half, and watching the game you really saw them making a concerted effort to wrap the ball up and hold it in and just at all costs avoid having the offload, as that's where Brisbane can get you. Then in the second half, Penrith got a little bit tired. They felt the crowd, the momentum wasn't with them, and Brisbane were able to generate more offloads, able to get the ball out the back, kind of forced at one point to try and get themselves into the game and find points. And then Brisbane get the momentum. I think the Storm will really identify that and try and do what they can to limit those offloads for the Broncos, which opens up a lot of their attack. That's what really helped them late in the game against the Raiders as well. Just really running on top of the ground, moving the ball around a lot. The Storm will have a game plan to shut that down. And at the end of the day, defense is what wins these games. The Storm have that edge. That's the way that I'll be going here, taking the Storm to win this game. We've seen over the years, for basically 2 decades, the better defensive side wins these matches, and I think that's going to be the case again here. Brisbane just don't have a big enough attack advantage. Even though the Storm are clearly the better defensive side, they're still very even in attack, and Brisbane aren't significantly better, and there's no major factors that should really push Brisbane up ahead here. So I think the Storm can get this done from a defensive perspective for the reasons that I just mentioned here at the end. Another thing that I quickly wanted to mention as well is if this does come down to a close game as well, I think that also favors the Storm slightly. Even though the Broncos have been able to get it done in close games of late, the Storm are 7-4 in games decided by 6 or less this year. Brisbane are only 4-3 overall, and just think these second half comebacks, final 20-minute comebacks, that's going to run out in this one. And Brisbane, to a degree, might have just played their grand final last week. But overall, it should be a really good game. For the total, as I said, it's moved up to 41.5. 9 of the past 13 head-to-head have gone over. They're consistently moving the total up in grand finals, even though we've seen an even spread of games going over and under. Keep in mind, this is a pretty high total and higher than we generally see in these games. And at the moment, I'd be leaning towards the under, as I think it's going to be more of a defensive style game. And if the Storm can win that battle early, they'll be able to defend their way to victory. Similar to what Penrith tried to do last week, but couldn't get it done. This time around, the Storm should be able to. Right now, I'll be going with the Storm at the current market, particularly with them around the $1.75 mark. I do think there is a little bit of value there in that current price. So that's my overall view on the NRL Grand Final. Hopefully you found this video insightful and it gave you some things to think about in terms of analyzing games, all the different things that you can look at. Obviously, it's not about one stat or one trend or one piece of information that's going to make a team win, but you want to blend all of this together to come to a conclusion. And when I look at it and see that the Storm have the really good record against the Broncos, they have the advantage in terms of how this game should be officiated as well, and a good record with him in charge. It being at a neutral venue, the Storm with the extra rest advantage, their record with those players in those positions, and also just their game style suits a grand final in this kind of situation a bit more than the Broncos does. And also their form leading in terms of how they've won games, starting well, sustaining a lead, as opposed to trying to make a comeback when you're well and truly out of the game. I think, there's enough edges there with the Storm to get it done. In the following video, I'll go through the try scorers for this game as well, so we'll cover a few different ones and let you know which are the best ones, so stay tuned for that video. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Even though it's the final week of the season, there's still going to be videos coming out. I'm going to be going through a strategy to bet on the American football during the off season, how you can profit on that. Also, there'll be horse racing videos, everything you need to keep on making money from your betting accounts through the end of the year, early next year, and then into the 2026 season. So if you want to make money betting, you definitely don't want to miss any of those videos. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you've had a great season betting on the NRL and enjoy the grand final. But I'll see you again in the try scorer preview for the grand final, which will be out tomorrow.